going to let Stacy go first. Representative Abrams, she and I have a good connection. She represents the elementary school I attended, Mary Lynn. That's what a fine elementary school that I attended there not too many years ago. So,
thank you. Good afternoon. I'll be brief. I think we know that the challenges are what's laid out in this book. I think the larger issue is that we're probably not going to tackle most of them because they are going to require investment, they're going to require tough choices, and they're going to be politically dangerous for people to make these choices. I'm privileged to sit here with Chairman Coleman because he's willing to do all three of those things. The challenge is getting our colleagues to come along, especially in an election year. But I do think there are opportunities for us to begin addressing these issues. I was on a panel this morning with Chairman Terry England, who is the chair of Budget and Appropriations, and he pointed out that recessions are a great time for making smart decisions because when you're in a crisis space, you are forced to really pay attention to what's happening. I think we're at a crisis with our educational system. The question was asked, how did we get here? I would say the answer is we have deeply disinvested from education. We have disconnected what education is for from what it delivers. So while the world was moving, we stopped thinking about how we need to evolve, how we teach our students. But we also have to recognize that the cost of education is going to be very different than it was 20 years ago, let alone 50 or 100 years ago. Georgia is a much more complex society. We are no longer black and white. We are a state that has a growing minority population with 3 times higher English learners than most other states to the national average. We are a state that is going to be a bookend state with a much heavier population, both under 25 and over 75 in the next 20 years. And if we don't start addressing those trends today, we will find ourselves in 10 to 15 years, I think, further behind than we could possibly imagine. I think the other opportunity and the other challenge for us is to recognize that children are not created equal, and thus the funding cannot be done in this sort of a qualitative process. We have to recognize that we have to spend more on certain children to help them, that we have to do more than pay for a teacher in the classroom. I think in the book it talks about the fact that 47% of Georgia's rural students live at or below the poverty line. That means that you have attendant services that are going to be essential if education is to actually penetrate. And that doesn't even talk about what happens in the inner city, but more importantly, what's happening on the edges of the suburbs, where you have working class families that are slowly losing ground in terms of wages and therefore have increased mobility in terms of where they're putting their kids. I think all of those are challenges that you've talked about and you've heard about. I think the challenge and the opportunity for the legislature is for us to decide that we are willing to actually invest in education. I've heard some of my colleagues take great pride in the cuts we've made. Well, when you're talking about losing 300,000 teachers or educators over the last 4 years, when you talk about the decisions to start removing resources from the classroom, it's not simply an issue of what you're doing to the children, it's what you're doing to the economy. If we want good jobs, if we want businesses to come, they need to understand that we understand the value of investment. And so I'm here because I believe that this group focuses on that. I'm proud to work with Chairman Coleman because I think he is willing to be a visionary on those issues and to stand against both parties when the conversation has to be about how you help children. And so I look forward to having the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, I'm proud to work with this fine lady. She's exactly right. Education is not a partisan issue. We all know that. It's nonpartisan. It should be treated that way. And everything we've been doing, especially the last 3 or 4 years, has been nonpartisan. We've involved both parties and communities and principals, superintendents, all education community, the public community, business community, in trying to identify and to try to seek solutions. And I want to say I agree with what she said about what's happened over the last few years, and I think now's the time for us to look at it. And that's one reason that 4 years ago, really 5 years ago, I was really concerned. And I talked with the speaker, I talked with both parties, and that's when we decided, and I'm proud of this piece of legislation because I think that was the start of it all, 186. When we said, I'm really concerned, we talk about all we're doing in this state, all this great graduation rate increase, but we still had the 30 to 40% who were not graduating. And when Kia let us know that they had interviewed, what was it, 43,000 to hire 1,900, and that they needed not GEDs, they needed high school graduates, and to find people who could do the technical skills they needed. we put a committee together, and Randy Nix chaired that. And you heard Superintendent Bard say that I think we pulled together, that's going to go down, I think, in history as the finest piece of legislation that our houses ever worked with. Not just a piece of legislation, but what it did. It united the governor, it united the House, the Senate, and it united the State Department of Education. And I want to commend Superintendent Barge. I think we got a great leader there that knows where we need to go and knows how to get there. So that's been a good piece. And I think the second piece that's critical, that's putting this together, that's helping us to answer and address some of these questions, was 192. And of course, I talked with Representative Abrams about that. We was looking at putting this committee together. It was nonpartisan. The first time in the history of this state we've legislated a piece of funding legislation. In the past, the governors just commissioned a study. I've been fortunate over the last 50 years. If you read my bio, I worked, started teaching in '62, worked under Minimum Foundation, minimum, that's just the best, least we got to do. Then I worked under APEG, minimum wasn't enough, let's do an adequate program. So we worked with that, that wasn't enough. Then, boy, we passed the best one ever, QBE. You remember that one, Steve? That was going to revolutionize everything. But you know, those three programs were all great, but we never funded them. You know, that was the problem. Didn't decide we didn't have the money right then. Then under a couple of governors, we decided we would, instead of taking care of QBE, let's just do 1187. Y'all may remember that one. That was a study we did. It was going to redo the education. Then we said, no, let's IE square it. So we decided to IE square it. Steve, you served on that some. I think you remember that. But we never came out. So we felt it was time to stop messing around, and that's not a good word to use, but stop fooling around with these funding formulas. So we decided QBE is not bad. We just needed to address it because it hadn't been looked at in 25 years but one time. Let's decide what we need to do, how we need to do it, and let's look at the programs in QBE, Quality Basic Education Act, the programs outside of it that governors had placed outside to keep from funding QBE, and let's see if we can't put them together and find out what we're doing. So what those two programs have done, they have set, I think, our program for the next 2 years especially, is what we're going to do in education. So I'll just throw those out quickly, then we'll answer your questions. We're looking at doing the 7 things as this year's result of this funding commission. 20 members. There's 20 members been divided into 4 subgroups, and we've involved, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you go online, the State Department's line, you can see all the minutes. We've involved literally hundreds of people, school people, business people, in this study. We've had over 40-something meetings just this year since March to try to pull together. And our goal this year was to look at the low-hanging fruit, what we felt like we could address, you know, quickly, that would start and show people we really meant business and we're going to do something, and then we can tackle some of the tougher issues next year when we had the time. So that's what we're doing. And I'm just going to outline what we're looking at this year in education. We're looking at 7 things. Basically, we're looking at, and the governor addressed a lot of these in his budget. I'm proud to say that our governor embraced this commission, and he's working with us to try to pull this off. The Senate is, Representative Miller, and the Senate and the House. But basically, we have passed basically 3 recommendations already out of the House Education Committee. One was to look at Title 20. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the law that we passed over the years, hundreds of laws that govern legislation. You heard John Barge talk about technology. People, this world has changed. This is a wonderful changing world. I heard a futurist the other day say in the next 25 years, we're going to have more technology than we have in the world today. That's scary. But did you know we have a law that says you can't have iPods, iPads, and cell phones in the classroom? I mean, today, we talk about can't afford it. Students have it. I know very few students that don't have a cell phone or don't have something they could bring into a classroom. So we're looking at these antiquated laws. We've identified 35 that we're going to hear in the House next week that we're going to go ahead and eliminate immediately, similar to that. Another thing we're looking at is this whole thing of equalization. You mentioned that. Our systems aren't, I mean, it isn't equal all over. I mean, in Fulton County, 1 meal may generate $12 million, where in Telfairo County, it may only yield $33,000 a month. So we're looking at the equalization formula. It's not fair. It needs to be looked at, and the courts have said we need to provide all students with an equal education. So we're looking at that new formula, and the commission's meeting Tuesday, and we're going to vote out, Representative England has it, his subcommittee, a new formula, a new way of calculating equalization. We know the money's short. We really would love to have $800 million for it. But we're going to have realistically, about $400 million, so we need to find a way to equally and fairly distribute that. Another piece of legislation that we're going to deal with this year that's antiquated was the capital outlay. Building, money for building schools. I'm proud to say for the first time in a while it's being recommended to be fully funded. We have 4 pots of money, one for fast-growing systems, a regular pot, one for advanced funding, and one for the poor systems. Well, we found that over the last few years, because of the slowdown, there hasn't been a lot of demand for the fast growth money. Fulton and Forsyth have asked for it, but we're looking at closing the fast growth out and combining that with the regular allotment, and at the same time providing money. There's some systems out there that have to wait 8 and 9 years, 2 cycles to get enough money to build a school they need. So this will allow the state to go ahead and fast fund that. Did you know during that tornado we could not help those schools out because the law prevented us from advancing money to them? So we're looking at addressing those things. That's another one. Another thing we're looking at doing in this one, the bill that you're going to be seeing, as John said, we're extending, Superintendent said, we're extending just 1 year now the date for the total implementation of 186. Ladies and gentlemen, when we met with Kia, Walmart, the military told us that as of now, they no longer accept GEDs. They want a high school graduate. Kia said that. Walmart said they're moving that way. So we got to see that those children stay in. And we're supporting the governor's Go Work Georgia. All of these things are coming together with these pathways, hopefully to have children identify early on the pathways where they want to go. Not that they can't change. And I want to commend our new chancellor, Ron Jackson, our technical school commissioner, and our state school superintendent. They are working together to allow, for the first time, and I've been here 20 years, the real seamlessness that we've needed to allow these children. Did you know in 186 we've eliminated seat time? That is, if a child is in the 12th grade and they can pass the test, why should they sit there? And they could go on and move and start their college work. Why should a 9th grader that's about to drop out sit there and drop out? He can eliminate that high school seat time and possibly move on into the technical school, or the technical school teachers can come on in and allow that child to get their diploma and allow that child to get their work-ready certificate so that they'll be interested in staying in school. I've been fortunate the last 6 months. I've been in Wisconsin, I've been in Alabama, I've been in Illinois working with school boards and school systems. I want to say we have problems, they have problems. I'm glad to be in Georgia. But we're way ahead, ladies and gentlemen, way ahead of where these states are trying to do some of these things. This is some of the things we're doing. Charter. You asked me this, Nancy, where are you back there? You asked me this when I came up, where are we on the charter constitutional amendment? Our government is completely behind charter schools. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've got to offer all opportunities. Homeschooling, charter schooling, private schooling, public schooling. But I'm going to tell you what's right for one ought to be right for the others too. They say charter is so wonderful because they have all this freedom and flexibility. Well, you know, my goal in this whole study, let's provide the same flexibility with accountability to our public schools. If it's good for them, let it be good for them. Let's give them the money. Let's hold these elected boards and appointed superintendents accountable and get the job done. So you see where we're planning to go in. And with our friends' support in the House, we're going to do it in the House, and we feel the Senate and the governor's going to support it. I'll stop. You ask questions because I could go on and on. You know me, I run my mouth all the time. All right. I'm also a licensed auctioneer, so if I get going too fast, I'll sold and I'll slow down. Okay. All right, we'll take questions.
Representative Coleman, what do you think will happen in terms of rewriting QBE?
Remodeling QBE?
Rewriting it, yeah.
Well, QBE, the funding formula, I've looked all over the country. A funding formula is a funding formula, and we did a lot of work, and QBE is an excellent funding formula considering all the weights, you know, and you'd have to a long time to go into it. You know, you have a weight and a half of special needs students, different, and they're there, so that's fine. We just have not in the last 25 years adjusted it for inflation. We have not. There's not a technology component in it. As we were saying earlier, that component's absent. We're saying you have to use this money for textbooks, you have to use this money for this. Media centers. I mean, I'm a big supporter of media centers, but you know, why should it be in a little room? I mean, you have the technology all over. Why couldn't the media specialists do some other creative things, you know, out the schools? So we're looking at revising it, adjusting it for inflation, seeing what needs to be rolled in and out of it. The government, for instance, we rolled in transportation, we rolled in school nurses, and I think staff development was rolled in this budget. That's part of QBE. That was outside, so here we are with funding this, and QBE wasn't been funded. Any new money needs to be rolled into the education formula so that it's done equally and fair. So that's where we're looking at changing it. And we got to decide what the partnership's going to be. I mean, should the state fund 100% of education? Should it fund 50%? Should we have a 5 mil buy-in? Should it be a 10 mil buy-in? Should we require systems to at least have a 12 mil buy-in to get equalization? Those are things we're looking at. So that's where we're. It's a tough job, and it's going to take a while.
You did lose me for just a brief second there. You
Ma'am?
lost me briefly there when you were talking about the accountability and the flexibility within charter schools, homeschooling, private.
What I'm saying.
I do have a specific question about it,
Okay.
just because my children are homeschooled for reasons that have nothing to do with public school.
Right.
And when they're ready for public school, if they choose that, that's fine. Are you talking about putting more restraints on homeschooling families?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
Let me say this.
I just want to clarify that because I would be curious.
No, that's important. You remember we had the Tim Tebow bill 3 or 4 years ago. That was to allow homeschoolers to play sports and come in. We thought that would breeze through. Let me tell you, if any of you came, we had an outpouring of homeschool parents said, leave us alone. Don't you do it. We don't want it. We have our own. So, no.
But I mean, I support all kinds of
No,
education.
ma'am.
I appreciate living in a place where you can do
But I'm
the
just
best thing
saying,
for your children.
we're
I just
not.
want to make sure that I didn't mishear that.
And let me add to that, private schools, vouchers, have come to me and said, Brooks, and I can name you the best ones in the metro area. We don't want your voucher money. Leave us alone. Why do you think they're saying that? Why do you think they don't want the money?
They don't want the strength attached.
There you go. You heard. What did we say about federal? Anytime you take, I wrote John's remark down. With money comes power. They don't want us taking care of ourselves. So they don't want the money. Now, some of I call them fly-by-nights, whatever. Give us the money to get us started. You have a comment on that one?
Well, I mean, I think that leads into the issue of the tuition tax credits.
Yes.
The fact that we passed, put aside the fact that I have a fundamental opposition to vouchers because I don't think they're competitive. But when we did a workaround to allow particularly religious schools to access, yeah, well, the SSOs, the scholarship, school scholarship organizations. The problem is they're allowed to access $50 million. And the legislation that we updated last year specifically excludes them from accountability. So we're giving away $50 million for education cost, and it's against the law for the Department of Revenue to provide adequate information for accountability and tracking. My concern is that if we're going to expand and allow for flexibility and accountability, there has to be accountability. And by putting those protections in the law to allow for millions of dollars to go untracked, and to then make it a crime to get access to that information, that undermines the legitimacy of the program. If this is a good idea, if it makes sense for our students, then we should be able to get the information that tells us it's true. I think if you read the brochure, it does a pretty good job of explaining it, but the larger question is why would we allocate, and not only is it $50 million, but now there's a push to actually raise the cap again, but without any proof that it's actually delivering better services to our students. And so I think it's important that as we talk about flexibility, we also have to demand accountability. If you don't want the money, then absolutely you should have fairly unfettered, and I say fairly because I'm a lawyer and people do dumb things, but if the state's going to invest those dollars, the state has an obligation to be able to speak to where those monies are going, and we are not doing that right now.
So do you see that as a battleless session?
I think battle assumes they'll let us fight it, but we will be talking about it. And I think it's a critical issue because you're talking about, when you look at how we spend our dollars, and I think Chairman Coleman is correct, if you think about how we spend our dollars, the questions that we ask, these are taxpayer dollars. I can think of almost no other circumstance where we would allow $50 million that should be going to fund our children's education to go unchecked. And in an environment where we are talking about transparency, where we have faced now 2 different school systems that have been harmed because of the lack of transparency, the lack of accountability, it seems anathema to me that we would create this standalone entity that would not have obligations for information. So I certainly say on my side of the aisle, we will be raising these issues. I think there are those in both parties who believe that this is an issue. The question is whether we can get them to join us.
Where are you on that?
Pardon?
Where are you on that?
Well, on that one right there, I think there needs to be some accountability and we need to have some transparency there. I really do. It bothers me. Matter of fact, I walked in the bank the other day, and a lady, one of my good friends, grabbed and said, "My preacher has asked me to join an SSO." And said, "What is that?" And I said, "Well, you don't know what it is?" And he said, "Just give the money and then it'll be taken care of, you know." But I think there's got to be more transparency. And I want to know where it is. I want to know who's getting it. What bothers me, I want to know the students that need it, because that was the concern, that it was for students who needed it. And it bothers me that maybe you could give money for my child and I could give it for your child. We can't give it to our children, but you know, I'd like to have more transparency, yes. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
A little bit on the local fair share, and because I cover Fulton County, and obviously we are, you know, we're the top. We give a lot of the fair share, and I know there has been some talk about maybe taking more and to equalize. However, we pay some of the highest millage, we pay some of the highest property taxes in the state as well. So what's the line between taking and giving and taking and equalizing?
Of course, on the $5 million and the fair share, you realize that Fulton, Gwinnett, because I'm in Gwinnett, you know, and we claim we send a lot too. We actually send no money. We keep all of our local money. But what it is, it's your state amount that you just, the state deducts in order to equalize amount. And we're looking at that. We're looking at, should there be a $5 million buy-in? By that, what we say, every system has to tax himself at least 5 mills, and we look at that, and that's equalized supposedly at 80-20. See, I don't know if it ever has been, Mr. Dollinger. I don't know if it's ever been the 80-20. I don't think it has, but that's what it was. So we're looking at that. We're also looking for equalization money that you've got to at least tax yourself 12 mills. And you can use if you had a splice or an e-splice, that could be account for 1 mill. Because we have some systems out there that are complaining they don't have the money, but yet they're at 11, 12 mills. And right now we equalize all the way up to 20 mills. So, you know, so you answer your question, yes, we're looking at that. What should the buy-in be? Where should they? And we're looking at changing. I will say this, we'll know tomorrow, Tuesday for sure. Should we eliminate the wealthiest 5, the poorest 5, and do a state average to consider equalization? Where do we go? So those things we're determining. And that'll be decided Tuesday, and then we'll have a debate for a while, and that'll be decided in the legislature. What's going to do? Good question. Yes, ma'am.
You know, I asked Herb Garrett this morning when he was here what he thought the 3 things the legislature had done to help education in the state in the past few years. And I think it's fair to say he thought about that for a second. And I'm not actually sure he said anything. But he did a lot of good intentions, but not good results. I'd like to ask President Abrams and then Coleman, what have we done in the legislature to actually help public schools, and I would use the word traditional public schools, because there's been a great zest for charter schools, obviously, but starting with you, Stacey, do you think we've done much to help schools in the past few years?
I would say probably the one I could point to is 186. I think that's an important piece of progress. I think the intention of the charter school language, and I know you said traditional public schools, but I think the decision to allow traditional systems to turn themselves into charter systems allowed for a level of innovation that wouldn't have been possible. And so it hasn't had a macro effect, but in terms of, I think, micro effects for some districts, I think it has been a useful tool. I look at Decatur, and Decatur has always had pretty strong educational results, but it has allowed them, I think, to help with their diversity challenges. I'm very loath to come up with a third one. I think the largest issue we have is that the state has systematically cut the funding. And, you know, to go from a system of 60-40, which I would argue is probably still not the right ratio, because you put incredible pressure on property taxes, which are not a very well calibrated tool for funding. Of the tax systems, of the tax revenue sources, property taxes are the hardest to calibrate because it is entirely dependent on the mix of properties that you have in a given community. And so, as the chairman pointed out, if you're in Telfair County or Telfair County or Screven County, your ability to generate adequate revenue is going to be limited by who decides to live there, which means that you have disadvantaged from the beginning the children who were dependent on this fairly volatile source. It's not volatile in terms of collection, but it is volatile in terms of, if you compare across the rest of the state, how much revenue you're going to be able to generate. The reason the state has had the obligation to put funding in is because the state has the ability to aggregate and then to disperse funds more effectively. And each time we cut education funding on the state level, each time we move towards a 40 or 50-40 split, what we said was we are going to disinvest from the communities that have the greatest need at the worst possible time. And so certainly for me, the best thing that we're talking about is reviewing how we're doing those allocations. But you know, I think it's a late, we're sort of late to the game with that one. So I can come up with two, and I think that we have the potential for a third one if we do what we're supposed to do this year on funding.
All right. I think that, of course, it has been bad. We do have, I mean, it's a fact of life, people. We have the austerity cut. My budget at home, I've had to cut my budget. And I know it's a fact, ladies and gentlemen. We've said this from the beginning of the study. It is a fact we do have a deep cut. They're not going to be restored immediately. I wish I could wave a magic wand. I've talked about having a bake sale or an auction or something, you know, anything. But if we could just put the money back, it's not going to happen. We have got to start where we are. And I think that's one of the beauties of this study, 192. You ask what we've done, I think House Bill 192, to allow this study to see where we are, and going forward, let's put the money where it should be into the QBE line item and allow students of the schools the flexibility to do it. I think another thing we've done that's helped schools out is this whole thing of choice. You know, it was Alicia with that choice bill, I think was fantastic. And I think Decatur, Marietta, and Beaufort gets a lot of criticism because they say it's for athletics, but people, they have one of the finest academic programs you've ever seen. Beaufort is open. We allow any school to do this. Open their doors up to anybody that wants to come, just pay the local tax, you know, children to choose. And I want to commend Will Schofield. If you haven't been there, go to Gainesville City. I mean, you talk about choice. They pick their schools in elementary. You can work on their teachers. He's developed a great information system to look at. Also, he tells me they run buses on PTA night because it's high Hispanic. Mm-hmm. And I think their motto is no excuses. We're going to serve you supper, he says, so come on down and join us at PTA. I mean, I think that's been, this choice that we've allowed schools to have the choice. I think the flexibility. Schools were going to have to choose this year, you remember, whether they want to be charter, they wanted to be I-square or stay like they are. We've extended, it's not time, people, for that. We've extended to 2015 the ability for flexibility. We've let them use their money as they see fit with accountability. And I agree with Representative Abram, we got to continuously say the accountability component. And so I think the charter systems, again, and the I-squares, we have, I think, 9 or 10 schools that have chosen both as good. Is that, Maureen, does that get you what you want?
Yeah, although I think the schools would probably...
What do they think? You tell me what they think.
I think they would say flexibility with no money is not complete choice.
You said what? Flexibility is what?
Flexibility without money is not a choice.
Well, I would say, I mean, but here's my challenge, and this is, I think, where I disagree with the chairman and reluctantly.
Yeah.
But we could make the choice to put the money in. This is not a zero-sum game. It is not as though there isn't the ability to generate the revenue we need to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. It's a question of political will. Do we have the political will to raise the capital necessary to make the investment we need in education? I used this analogy this morning. If you think about Georgia as a company, we have unskilled workers. We basically have a company where the workers aren't skilled sufficiently to do the jobs we need them to do. We know that machinery is broken, and that's basically our infrastructure, and we know we have some logistical challenges. That's our transportation. If you were a company facing this issue, if I were a CEO of a company, you have 3 options. You can either bankrupt the company, and we're not allowed to do that. We're not Greece, so we can't bankrupt the state of Georgia. Second you can do is you can just decide you're going to produce a mediocre product, sell it at a dollar store, and just be okay with that. And you deal with the fact that you're never going to be top of your game. But the third option, the one that the best CEOs choose, is that you do a capital call. You tell the people who invest in your company that in order for us to be the #1 company, for us to produce what we need to produce, we have to do a capital call. We need everyone to put a major amount of investment in, because if we do that, then we will have sufficient revenue to improve our skilled workers, to fix our machinery, to refine our logistics, and then you will produce a better product. Now, we've done that. That's exactly what the T-SPLOST is. The T-SPLOST is our capital call on our logistics.
And E-SPLOST.
And we've done it a bit on E-SPLOST as a little bit of the machinery of education, but we have not done the capital call for the core deliverable, the core deliverable of a state like Georgia is the education of our students. Because if you want economic development, if you want public safety, all of those things are tracked directly back to the value and the capacity of your educational system. And so we do have the option to say, if it costs $800 million, we have the option to say, let's find $800 million. It takes the political will to do that, because the only way the state can pay for it is through taxes. And we can call it anything we want. We can call it a tax, a fee, a splost, whatever we want to call it. When we choose to, we can do a capital call to pay for education. So we as a society, and it's not a political choice, it is, I think, a citizen choice. We have to decide what we're willing to pay for. And right now, I think we have chosen to not pay for education. We are happy to complain about it. We are happy to be concerned about it. And as legislators, we are happy to tinker with solutions to it. And I think Chairman Coleman has been great about leading a much harder charge towards coming up with a real solution. But we have a fundamental capital issue. And if we don't solve that issue, we are going to incrementally improve, but we are never going to see the radical improvement that we need for our educational system.
See, and I agree with her partially, but I want to say I think we have. I think one thing we've got to do, I've just sat through a week of budget hearings. We are being charged with just health care, with Medicaid, and then we heard the corrections department yesterday talk about how tremendous costs we need for the prison population. Then the transportation people told us we are going to be stopped on the freeways if we don't pass, that. We've looked at a possible penny sales tax for education, but do you confuse that right now with the T-Splash getting ready to happen? Schools have asked us for an E-Splash. We've talked about that possibility to be used for M&O. Do we put that out? And the superintendents are saying to me, don't you dare. It will kill us out here with our E-Splash and with everything else. Look what's happened to some of our commissioners that have just tried, and I can name you some personal examples, that have tried to raise, the taxes and do people. I don't think the mood is right from the people to do that right now.
I completely agree. I don't think it's simply politicians making the choice. My point was
the community needs to rise up and say, let's do it.
Yeah, but the idea that there is no solution is not true. There's a solution. We just have to be willing to do it.
If my constituents got behind me and said, Brooks, we want to, we'll work with them. Yeah. Good question. You got a good comment going, Marie. One more, two more. This lady here.
Okay. My question is, and since we're starting to look outside the direct realm of education, what other things coming down the pipeline in the legislature that might not be directly related to education do you see that are nevertheless important to the education?
Why don't you talk about what y'all are doing with about the prisoner system and things. That's going to help him.
So we've got two pieces. Juvenile justice reform is an important piece, and we don't think about it, but how we treat our juveniles who find themselves in the justice system speaks to whether we have higher dropout rates, speaks to their truancy rates, speaks to whether or not they're going to get GED. So reforming our criminal justice system for juveniles is going to be essential. We're also looking at a larger criminal justice reform. The reason that matters is that if you have parents who are taken outside the home for accountability crimes, drug crimes, DUIs, and they aren't allowed to actually be a part of their child's life, or if they lose their jobs because they're in jail, that has a direct impact on the capacity of that child to learn, to stabilize. And so each of those pieces, I think, are of a piece with educational reform, and those are two things I'm excited to work with.
I think then direct, and then the job growth the governor's pushing. Mm-hmm. All right. You had a question back then. That'll be it, I guess. Yes, one more. Right here. One more.
Well, I have a question sort of directly related. When you talk about how the citizens are really, not willing to rise up, do you not feel sort of responsible for that decision in a way? We, as taxpayers, as parents, as people in the community, we don't have a lot of control over how the money's spent once it gets out of our hands. So, we're sort of trusting people who have not proved themselves trustworthy to take this increase and actually do what they say they're going to do with it. And sort of historically, that hasn't really been the case. Do you object to that sort of characterization?
I would expand on it. I think that the reality is citizens are not taxed as heavily as they think they are. Things cost money. The things we want cost money, and only in government do we expect the cost to be lower than the deliverable. And part of that's the fault of government. We hide, we obscure, we fudge how much it costs to do things because we don't want anyone to hold us accountable too much for it. And it happens for different reasons. But the fundamental reality is that the result lives at home with you. If your child has an educational issue, the citizens see that first. And so I think it's incumbent upon citizens to move beyond we've created a binary conversation of being either taxed or not. We're either pro-tax or anti-tax. I don't know a single person who is pro-tax. I am not. I do not like paying taxes, but I recognize that the things I want cost money, and that the way I pay for things that I want from government is through paying taxes. When you create a space where your politicians are afraid of having that conversation, not even making a decision, we're afraid to have the conversation about it, lest we be tarred by the next opponent, or more importantly by our constituents, as having the wrong conversations, we can't get to the decisions we need to make. And I mean, this is a bit of a kumbaya moment, but one of the reasons I really do enjoy working with Chairman Coleman is that he feels absolutely no pressure not to have a conversation. He will talk about anything if he thinks it's relevant to education. But there's got to be space created for more people besides him. I live in an area of Georgia where right now, and this may change after you guys publish your stories, where I won't lose my job because I talk about taxes, but that could happen. But if you're afraid that you can't keep your job, if you talk about the very thing that can help you do your job, then that's both your fault as a legislator, but it's also the fault of the citizens who use that as a measuring stick about whether they're going to hire you again or not.
But isn't that a lack of education, though?
And exactly, but it's a two-way street. There is no fundamental obligation. I do my best. If you come to I think Maureen's been to one. If you come to a meeting with me, you will talk about taxes for at least 20 minutes, because I think that that's the most fundamental issue that the electorate does not understand. Whether you in the end decide you don't want to pay another penny, that's your prerogative, but you're going to understand what it pays for. Yeah. But the reality is, I have an obligation to put the information out there, but citizens also have the obligation to talk about it too, and to not create binary decisions, either I'm for tax or anti-tax. It's I am for these things being better or I'm against it, and if we screw up, fire us. That's the most fundamental way to get rid of us. But instead, we all kind of live within this malaise where when asked a very simple question of what have we done in 10 years to improve education, I'm asked for 3 ideas. I can only come up with 2. That's a problem. It's my fault, but it's also the fault of the citizens who haven't been as engaged as I think they can be. And I mean that as a citizen myself. I haven't done the things I need to do, but I'm trying. And I think we all have a collective obligation to do better about the things we want to invest in.
I won't finish because I think it's time's up. I'll finish up. I want to say that I agree. I have a town hall meeting. I've been doing it for 15 years. Every Saturday morning, I start usually 9:30, 10 o'clock. I go to 11, 11:30, 12 at the Duluth Rexall. And if you've never been there, there'll be 400 or 500 people eating breakfast there every Saturday morning. And people come in and they talk. I agree with you. And you know what's been the hottest topic the last few weeks? Of course, in Gwinnett, it's been the HOT lanes. And most of these guys and gals, they don't even ride in them, don't even get on the freeway. But they've heard people upset, you know. And it's interesting, and they don't mind telling you what they think. But taxes, I do. We talk about this is one of the hardest things to talk about and the least understood. Yes. They don't understand what it takes. You know, they want all of these things. When you ask them, what would you cut? What do you do away with? I don't want to do away with anything, but I don't want to pay anymore. So, you know, it's interesting. But I want to say I appreciate you. Come to my meeting. My meetings are open. Come to the Rexall. I'll buy you breakfast. We'll have a good time. I don't want anything from you. I'm not taking anything or you no gifts. That's right.
We'll be signing legislation to that effect soon.
But we appreciate you having us. This is always a highlight.
Thank you very much for being here. How about a round of applause for our legislators? Allow me to give you a few closing comments and some reminders. Before we get out here, we're going to let you get out here in time, so I got to speak quickly. I want to thank my staff, first of all, for the hard work that they put into this. They all work hard on this, but this is particularly Bill's baby and his work. It was his vision. We said earlier that this is the 8th edition of the Top 10. It's the 6th time we've had this media symposium. It was Bill's idea to do this, and we love being a resource for you. And when he said earlier we'd like to do that, you call Bill and he will track Dana and me down. We'd like to have conversations with you, which we have with many of you, sometimes just kicking ideas around. You know, why is this a big deal? What are the 2 sides or 3 sides of this issue? And then if we don't know the answers, we will recommend someone else that you can call. Please fill out your evaluation form before you leave. It really is important for us. We're into that continuous improvement philosophy, so what we hear from you will help make this a better experience next year for those of you who want to come back and maybe some of your colleagues. For those who couldn't come here today, or if you want to go back and and look at this. Bill mentioned that he'll have this up on the videotape of this on our website probably next week sometime.
Thursday or Friday, probably.
So he'll send you a link though. He will send you an email and a link so you'll be able to go directly to that. We said earlier, if you'd like to have 2 hard copies of this, or you know people who would like to, just have them email us. We'll give you 2 free ones. Of course, it's on the website now that people can download. There's a new piece that we're doing. Every 2 years, we go across the state and hold candidate sessions for anyone running for office, House, Senate, school board, mayors. We expanded that last year for community leaders who like to have more information. We kind of call it our Education 101. We do that with the Georgia School Board Association. This year, we're going to add a new piece of that. We're getting ready to roll that out in the next few weeks. It's going to be called our Policy Toolbox. You can go to our website, and it'll be a list of different topics, kind of like what Education Week has. And you can click on that topic, and like in the top 10, get background information, national scope, Georgia, and then some ideas of what we could be doing about that. So stay tuned for that. The toolkit or toolbox will be on our website also. And next week, actually, Brooks and Senator Miller have invited Dana and me over to a Joint Education Committee meeting on the 26th at 1 o'clock to present the top 10 to the House and Senate Education Committees. So stay tuned for that, or you can look at the video stream for that part. Staff, any other, Bill, Diane, any other little pieces? Dana? I think these are all the ones we wanted to cover. Well, thank you very much for being with us. We're glad to be able to provide this, and we're glad you're able to join us. Let us be a resource for you. We really would like to do that. Thank you very much.